welcome. It's nice to see you back again. Nice to be back again. A little bit of normality, as they say. I rather liken the History Society at the moment as nomadic, because I think within the last dozen or so meetings we've moved from the school to the library and now to the golf club. So I suppose we're on par, as you would say. So we've left the camels out of the way in the hope that we won't have to move again. We will be here again next month, without a doubt, unless you misbehave tonight and we get kicked out. But that's the plan. We will be here next month. So I'm not going to make a long speech. Good for that, they said. We will be doing a calendar for 2022. It'll only be one size, one off. And they may be available for next month. They will definitely be available for November. Now, I have mentioned in the various bits of information that I've sent out that we are in need of a treasurer. Now, you know, it's easier to tell people that when you've got them physically surrounding you. So I shall ask Sarah to close and lock all the doors. And we should expect to have at least 3 volunteers. At least 3 volunteers before we leave tonight. So don't forget, we do need a treasurer because Anne is moving on. So, my usual rubbish. In 1915, the German Zeppelin, this is on this day in 1915, the German Zeppelin bombs London for the first time. In 1950, 116 miners entombed in an Ayrshire colliery were reached by their rescuers. In 1970, now you've got to remember this. In 1970, a British airliner en route from Mumbai to London was hijacked to Jordan. And finally, 2015, Queen Elizabeth, the current Queen, became our longest reigning monarch. Now, I don't intend to be chairman for that long, but there you are. So, for tonight, we welcome Bill Rogerson, our speaker. Bill I have known for many years. We've travelled the length and breadth of the United Kingdom by train. We've also been involved with a charity train that used to go down to the boat show every year, and we used to organise the refreshments. And the first thing we did when we got to Euston, I used to give out 20p pieces, and we all used to go to the toilet because that's how much it cost to wash our hands because they were stained with tea. And then we used to go into the buffet for a cup of tea. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Bill, and his subject tonight is Murder Most Horrid, the tale of a savage surgeon. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. That was a really nice round of applause, so on that note, I'll leave. So, thanks very much indeed for the invite this evening, and also thanks very much for the cheque towards my local church in Valley near Holyhead as well. So, that's very much appreciated. Thank you. Like most organisations,
you don't want to vote?
No, that's okay. It's not HSBC, is it? We've had a few problems with them. Anyway, first of all, a couple of questions. Have we got any ex-police officers in the audience tonight? Anybody? All right, okay then. Any ex-medical people, nurses, doctors? All right. Okay. Anybody from God's own county, the Red Rose County of Lancashire? Anybody from Lancashire? Yeah. All right. Whereabouts are you from?
Withenshaw, Manchester.
Right. Right, okay. I was doing a Zoom presentation with the light over there in Ashton in Oldham Road the other... Yeah. Okay then. So, firstly, I'm not going to speak for too long on account of my throat this evening. Richard has threatened to cut it if I go on too long. And as Henry VIII said to his wives, I won't keep you too long. But down to the business of the evening. Well, murder most horrid. Stories of murder are not very pleasant at the best of times, but some can be really intriguing. Now you can imagine this story that's going to unfold for the next 5 hours. I mean, sorry, the next hour or so. Coming from an Agatha Christie novel and a film being directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And for the story, we're going to make our way to the historical city of Lancaster, a few miles from my birthplace of Morecambe. And as Dawn French would say, murder most horrid. Right, I will keep dashing backwards and forwards. Can you all see the screen from where you are?
Yeah.
And once I sort of settle down, and you can all hear me as well, can you? Yeah, the sound check as well, great. Okay then, so we're going to look at the savage surgeon, or the jigsaw murders, as the press named it. This story is of the savage surgeon, Dr. Buck Roxton, who murdered his common law wife, Isabella, and their nursemaid, Mary Jane. Now, this was one of the United Kingdom's most publicised murder cases of the 1930s, which gripped the nation at the time. The case is remembered for its innovative forensic techniques involved in solving it. The police knew he was guilty straight away. Their problem was to prove that the skillfully dismembered remains they found were those of the two women. The result was one of the most sensational murder trials of the 20th century. And it is said that Roxton's tragedy is mirrored in the Shakespearean story of Othello, in the Moor of Venice, who, in a jealous frenzy, suffocates his wife Desdemona as she lies asleep in the mistaken belief that she was unfaithful to him. And I think most of us, when we were at school, learnt all about William Shakespeare. I was actually in Stratford-upon-Avon last week. So, we're making our way up to the County Palatine of Lancashire. My hometown here is Morecambe and Lancaster's here. And then, we don't talk about this place on this... it's a bit foreign to us. We fought a bit of wars over it. We have something called a pudding, you know. Anyway, enough about that. So this is some bits of Lancaster, the old prison there, just recently decommissioned as a prison. The Priory, Williamson's Park, and so on and so forth. And this is where the murder took place, Dalton Square, number 2 Dalton Square. And we can see also in the 1930s, Laurel and Hardy were appearing in the area. And the thin guy there, Stan Laurel, he's a Lancashire lad. He actually came from Ulverston, which is now in Cumbria, over the Morecambe Bay Sands. So, we'll crack on. The old-fashioned telephone box as well, if anybody's interested in architecture there. And this is Dalton Square today. It's had a number of uses. Today, it's used by the local social services. The telephone box has gone, and sadly so have Laurel and Hardy. So, we're going to have a look at the assailant now, Dr. Buck Roxton. So I'll just sit down for this bit. So, Bukia Rostami Hakim was born into a Parsi family of Indian-French origin in Bombay on the 21st of March 1899. He had a respectable middle-class upbringing and received a thorough education. And apparently, he was a thoughtful and sensitive youth. He studied at Bombay University, where, in 1922, he qualified as a Bachelor of Medicine and later as a Bachelor of Surgery. And great achievements were thought of this young doctor. Now, from university in Bombay, he joined the staff of Bombay Hospital before becoming a medical officer to the Malaria Commission. And on the 7th of May 1925, he married a Parsi girl in Bombay, but the marriage, sadly, was short-lived. However, he came to England by himself and concealed all evidence of his previous marriage, fearful that it would affect his social and professional understanding. He attended courses at London's University College Hospital, enrolling under the name of Gabriel Hakim. And then in 1927, he actually went to Paris. Then he moved to Edinburgh up in Scotland, which at that time was a major centre in the medical world. And he studied to become a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. Unfortunately, he failed the entrance exam on 3 occasions, but was allowed to practice by the General Medical Council on the strength of his excellent Bombay degrees. It was while he was in Edinburgh that he met his wife Isabella van S, then still married to a Dutchman, but using her maiden name of Kerr. It's something like out of a soap opera, isn't it? In Coronation Street or Emmerdale Farm or EastEnders. I don't watch those soap operas, but my wife does, and I can hear all about it at times. Anyway, by now, he changed his name by depot and to book Ruxton. This, he suggested to a friend, tripped off the tongue and was likely to prove more palatable in medical circles than his full name, which, like other aspects of his background, he jettisoned as inconvenient luggage. In 1929, while in London, Isabella gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, the first of their 3 children. In 1930, he moved down to Lancaster as a practicing doctor. He was reputedly a diligent general practitioner, well respected and popular with his patients, and known to waive his fees when he felt patients could not afford to pay him. The National Health Service was still a few years away. In 1931, Isabella gave birth to a second daughter, Diane, and 2 years later to a boy, Billy. A local girl, Mary Jane, was taken on to look after them. Now this is Bombay at the time of when he was born, so we can see how crowded it was, what have you. It's a different picture to this day. And then we have the 2 victims. We have Mary Jane from Morecambe and his wife, or his common-law wife, Isabella. And again, they never married. So that was unheard of in the 1930s, to live in sin, as it were. And again, it looks like something out of a soap opera. We have a look at the first victim, the mother of Ruxton's 3 children. And Isabella was born into a hard-working family in Falkirk on the 3rd of March 1901. The manageress of an Edinburgh restaurant, she married a Dutchman called Van S in 1919, but lived with him only for a few months. She met Ruxton and then in 1927 lived with him from 1928 onwards. Although she later changed the name by deed poll to Ruxton. As I say, she never ever married him. Her sisters were among the many people who believed that she was the doctor's legal married wife. And then we come to the second victim, Mary Jane. And she was born at Glebe Farm, Overton, near Morecambe, on the 5th of October 1915, to parents James, a farmer, and to Jane. She was just 19 when she went missing, and she'd been employed by Buck Ruxton in Lancaster, principally to look after his 3 children, but her duties extended to other jobs around the house. She was a simple girl, she had a happy outlook on life, and was well liked by her children, and she spent all her free time with her father and later her stepmother, and had never gone away without their prior knowledge. When on holiday, she wrote home nearly every day, and her disappearance was therefore quite out of character. And this is Mary outside the family home in Thornton Road, Morecambe. And I was actually born just at the hospital, just at the end of Thornton Road. But I won't tell you which year. You can ask Richard afterwards. This is Mary's father and stepmother. So, we come now to the Ruxton children with another nursemaid, Mrs. Anderson, shortly after the murders. And here's Ruxton with one of his children here outside the family home. So, we're back to number 2 Dalton Square. Now, Isabella, his common law wife, was an outgoing lady who enjoyed socialising with Lancaster's elite and was a popular guest at all functions. Emotionally unstable and obsessively jealous, Dr. Buck Ruxton became convinced that she was having an affair behind his back, though no evidence of infidelity was ever found. In Isabella, he found a woman whom he believed to be a formidable catch, intelligent, charming, independent and British. To cap it all, she was sexually emancipated. From the outset, there was a sadomastic streak to their love, violent quarrels, invariably initiated by Ruxton accusing Isabella of infidelity. And these would be followed by passionate lovemaking. And there is no evidence that Isabella was unfaithful, and Ruxton became increasingly jealous of Isabella's popularity. Now, eventually, his jealousy overwhelmed him, and on Sunday the 15th of September 1935, he strangled Isabella with his bare hands. And in order to prevent the housemaid Mary Jane from discovering the crime, before he could dispose of the body, he suffocated her too. And Ruxton then proceeded to use his medical knowledge and training to skillfully dismember and mutilate both bodies in his bath by removing all features that he thought would identify them. I should have said at the beginning, there are some graphic descriptions in this presentation this evening, but not too many of them. Now, Isabella was last seen alive on Saturday the 14th of September 1935, when she'd gone to Blackpool in Ruxton's car to see the illuminations and visit her sisters. She left to return to Lancaster at 11:30 p.m. The car was found at Lancaster the following morning, but of Isabella there was no sign. Mary Jane was also seen alive during that evening when she answered the door to a caller. In addition to employing Mary Jane, the Ruxtons employed 3 charwomen. On the fateful day, Ruxton had put 2 of them off from visiting the house. However, the 3rd charlady called at the house with 4 pints of milk and a copy of the Sunday Graphic newspaper, but was not allowed in, and she left the milk and paper on a table just inside the door and left. And over the next few days, Ruxton's behaviour became very furtive, to say the least, giving different explanations to people as to the whereabouts of Isabella and Mary Jane, including that they had gone to Edinburgh, were away on holiday, and that Isabella had gone away with another man, and as to how he cut his hand, which had been noticed by one of the charladies from trapping it in a door to cutting it on a tin of peaches. And later that day, he purchased some petrol for his Hillman car, and shortly before midday, he drove his 3 children to the home of a Morecambe dentist he and Isabella knew quite well, where he left his children for the day. On the following Monday, another char lady called at the house and found that the carpet had been removed from the stairs and straw had littered the floor. He again took the children to the home of the Morecambe dentist. The char lady looked closely at the carpet and noticed that it was stained. The stains looked suspiciously like blood. 20 to 30 buckets of water later, the colour that ran off them was still that of blood. Also, a blood-stained suit was discovered by her. Rogerson gave her an excuse as to why the items were blood-stained. And then on Tuesday the 17th of September, Rogerson hired an Austin 12 horsepower, presumably because he needed a car with a larger boot to avoid making several journeys to dump the dismembered bodies. He was involved in a road accident in Kendal, knocking a cyclist off his bicycle. The cyclist reported the incident to the local police, who intercepted his car at Milnthorpe, just a few miles south of Kendal. His explanation for what he had done and how he came to be there was later found to be contrived and unconvincing. Now we come to Captain Henry James Vann, Chief Constable of the Lancaster Borough Police, outside 2 Dalton Square shortly after the murders. And now we're going to have a look at the route of the journey. I don't know if it shows up too well, but here we have Lancaster at the scene of the murder, and then he took the A6 road, which is still in existence. We've got the M6 motorway going up here now. And he went through Kendal to Carlisle, and then he went into the borders and to a place called John Stonebridge and to Moffat, where he dumped the bodies in a ravine. We'll see that in more detail in a few moments. And some body parts were found in John Stonebridge as well. So Moffat is about 100 miles from Rogerson's home in Lancaster, and it's not known why he chose this particular place to dispose of the victims' bodies. It's probably that with him being in Edinburgh, and Isabella coming from Edinburgh, he passed down this road several times. So he thought, oh, that looks quite a bit of a lonely place. This is the little market town of Moffat. It's a beautiful town, and its symbol is the ram there. If ever you visited it, it's really nice, you know, for a coffee stop, and it's surrounded by the hills and what have you. Excuse me. And this is Garden Home Lynn, where he disposed of the bodies in 1935. Now this road here was the main road up to Edinburgh. Nowadays you've got the A74 and the M74 as well, which go from the M6. So, but this was the old, what they call the old Edinburgh Road. And this is the Garden Home Lynn today. It's still a major route, you know, if you're going up to Scotland and you want to take a scenic route, yeah, it's recommended that you go this way. It goes through the borders. Some very nice scenery there. This is again, these photographs were taken about 6 years ago when I went up to the scene. In actual fact, we were on the old road and I went up with my son and we came across the Garden Home Lynn, and we took a wrong turn and we ended up down another road, and this boat came out and he said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you here?" I said, "Oh, we're on a murder inquiry," and his face went white. And I explained to him, "Oh, no problem." And again, a bit more of the Garden Home Lynn of today. And this is where the bodies were. We were actually stood on the bridge looking down into the ravine now, and this is where some of the body parts were found. So this is the Garden Home Lynn and the position of the body parts. So starting at the top, there was a head lying on stones in the stream in clear water, head wrapped in child shorts, 17 pieces of flesh wrapped in a sheet, partly in water, 2 upper arms and 4 pieces of flesh in a blouse, lying partly in water and on stones. 2 arm bones, thigh bones, lower leg bones, and 9 pieces of flesh. 4 arms, minus tips of fingers and thumbs. A left thigh unwrapped, pelvis and flesh. Upper trunk, 2 lower legs with feet tied together, legs protruding from the cotton sheet. And pieces of flesh and paper, left forearm, you name it, like a butcher's shop.
Never slept tonight.
And this is Sergeant Sloan of the Dumfriesshire Constabulary, who's the first officer onto the scene. And he soon discovered a lot more body parts. This is them searching the ravine with bloodhounds. German shepherds hadn't come along on the scene at the time, but the local police used bloodhounds to do the searching and what have you. These are some of the officers searching the ravine there. See the old constable there with his cigarette going, like Alf Ventress from Heartbeat. These are not flashes, by the way. They're actually CID officers having a conference to discover where to go next and what have you. So these are having a... And then this one is the gruesome task of moving some of the body parts as well. So, we come now to some of the evidence found at the scene. The rompers and distinctive knot from the son of Ruxton, which parts of the bodies were wrapped in, which helped convict him. The top middle there. Some were found wrapped in newspapers. The Daily Herald, dated the 6th and 31st of August 1935, and the Sunday Graphic, dated the 15th of September 1935, and the Sunday Chronicle, and others wrapped in clothing. And on the 28th of October, a left foot was found in John Stonebridge, about 9 miles south of Moffat. And on the 4th of November, more body parts were found in Moffat on the Edinburgh Road. They'd been there for quite some time, and it was a lady that was out walking with a dog that actually discovered them. So this is the evidence at Glasgow University. It was taken by the Glasgow City Police because they felt that the Dumfriesshire Constabulary weren't competent enough to investigate the murder, so the higher detectives came from Glasgow and took it back. And this is the bath that Ruxton cut the body parts up in, and this is arriving at Glasgow University. And these are some of the body parts as reconstructed by Professor Bush. So we now come to the arrest. Initially, when the remains were discovered, the Dumfriesshire Constabulary turned their attention to any irregular journeys made by owners of cars registered in Dumfriesshire. However, they were not successful. It was when the police looked more closely at the pieces of newspaper the body parts were wrapped in that they made great headway. Among them was part of the Sunday Graphic, dated the 15th of September, later identified as one of the special editions issued only in the Lancaster and Morecambe areas. And this would have been the newspaper delivered to Ruxton by his charlady. And when no one in Morecambe appeared to have been reported missing, the Chief Constable of the Dumfriesshire Constabulary turned his attention to Lancaster. On the 9th of October, he called in Captain Henry Van, Chief Constable of the Lancaster Borough Police, who then took over the enquiry from the Glasgow detectives and the Dumfriesshire Police as well. Now, the parents of Mary Jane had meanwhile become increasingly concerned for the safety of their daughter. Despite Ruxton's effort To placate them, the parents went to the police asking that her description be circulated. One of the newspapers to pick up the story was Scotland's Daily Record. From its pages, Detective Lieutenant Ewing from Glasgow CID learnt that the doctor's wife was also missing. He noticed the similarities between the approximate description of one of the bodies given by Professor Glaister, a forensic scientist on the case, and that provided by Mary's worried father and stepmother. Being aware that both women had lived in the house of a doctor, which accounted for the way in which the bodies had been cut up, a blouse, which parts of the body were wrapped in, was shown to Mary Jane's stepmother, and she positively identified it as belonging to Mary Jane. It was also through Mary's stepmother that police identified the rompers, which some of the body parts were wrapped in. And then she mentioned that Mary and the Rogerson children had on occasions been given clothing by a Mrs. Holm, who let rooms to visitors at Grange-over-Sands. And among her visitors had been the Rogersons, who had stayed there in June 1935. And Mrs. Holm had no trouble in identifying the rompers, having tied a distinctive knot in their elastic before giving them to Mary for the children. Rogerson later told the parents that Mary was seeing a laundry boy and had become pregnant by him, and that she had gone with Isabella to have an abortion on the 1st of October. He changed his story to them and stated that Isabella and Mary had broken into his safe and had taken £30 and would return when they had spent it. So, on the 24th of September, Rogerson visited Lancaster Police Station to report Isabel missing, to divert him away from the torrent of publicity. And he suggested that any inquiry directed at him could only be the result of professional jealousy from other doctors in the area. And he made a second visit the next day. He then was a regular visitor to the police station, asking Lancaster Police to make discreet enquiries to find his missing wife. And increasingly, the press were making allegations against Rogerson. And he insisted that a statement be issued in the national press that there was no evidence to link Isabella and Mary's disappearance with the bodies found in Moffat. So now, by this time, the evidence was gathering apace. And at 9:30 p.m. on the 12th of October, at the invitation of Captain Van and his colleagues, Rogerson went to Lancaster Police Station for the last time and was asked to account for his movements between the 14th and 30th of September. And he produced an extraordinary document entitled My Movements, on which he had been working on the previous day, and made a voluntary statement denying all knowledge of the murders. After being further questioned and consultation with further senior officers from the Scottish Police, Rogerson was charged with the murder of Mary Jane at 7:20 a.m. the next morning. Most emphatically not, was his response to the charge. Of course not. The furthest thing was from my mind. What motive and why? What are you talking about? He was then remanded in custody, appearing in the Borough of Lancaster Police Court on the 5th of November, and he was then charged with the murder of Isabella. Now, after his arrest, he appeared weekly at Lancaster Borough Police Court and was remanded in custody each time. However, when he appeared before the court on Tuesday the 22nd of November, the chairman of the bench, Mr. Cross, caused a stir in the court. As usual in a murder case, the prosecution applied as usual to have Rogerson remanded in custody for a further 7 days. And at the conclusion of the brief hearing, Mr. Cross, the magistrate, said, "Accused will be remanded for a further 7 days on bail. A ripple of laughter in which Ruxton himself joined, and which rose to a crescendo of almost hilarity, followed by an innocent slip of the tongue. And the Chief Constable and Mr. Edwin Slinger, who was defending, sprung to their feet, and a fellow magistrate were whispering, "No, in custody, in custody." And Mr. Van apologetically said to the chairman, "You cannot do that, sir, you cannot do that." And Mr. Slinger said with a smile, "If you grant a remand on bail, sir, I shall feel most happy." Realising the significance of the slip, the chairman immediately retrieved the mistake, saying that the accused would be remanded for 7 days on both charges and in custody. And the committal proceedings began on the 26th of November and ran through to the 13th of December. And the evidence took 66 hours to get through, and there were over 200 witnesses. Now, when people have been arrested and charged, and still to this day, fingerprints are taken. And these are the actual fingerprints of Ruxton. And also, this case was a watershed in forensic examination and investigation, because for the first time, experts from various disciplines, such as dentistry, radiography, and even entomology, worked as a team with the police. Previously, these three disciplines worked separately, and a lot of cases were lost because of the rivalry between the forensic departments of the Edinburgh and Glasgow universities. Rarely had such a murder so completely held the nation's attention as the Ruxton case. Experts were as fascinated as by its sensation, seeking, as were the public, for the evidence was scientifically stimulating as well as gruesomely fascinating. It had been a monumental task to put all the jigsaw puzzle together. And it was unfortunate for Ruxton that he chose to conceal the remains in Scotland, because that's where the forensic science was just beginning to be called and was so advanced. England at that time was not so well served. So this is Ruxton, Ruxton still in custody, and this is the arriving for the trial at Manchester Assizes. It was an all-male jury. Ruxton solicitor Mr. Edwin Slinger, with the ball hat and the cigarette hanging from his mouth, and his honour Judge Mr. Justice Singleton there. The trial lasted for 11 days, and it was marked by overwhelming forensic evidence against Ruxton. And he was defended by Norman Burkitt, King's Counsel, and Philip Kershaw, King's Counsel. And the trial ended on the 13th of March 1936. And the judge, in part of his summing up, said there is too much to damn him. If there is an avenue, let him walk down it to freedom. But if there is not, he cannot. And in little over an hour, the jury had reached their verdict, guilty. And Mr. Justice Singleton then reached under his desk, put his black cap on, and sentenced him to death. Now, the reason it was held in Manchester was at the request of the defence, who wanted a different city. There was a lot of racist feeling in Lancaster against Ruxton, an incomer to a small-minded, close community, married, so they thought, to a white woman. Besides, there weren't many doctors in the city, and undoubtedly Ruxton took patients from others. He had built up a substantive practice quite quickly in the city's Dalton Square, and he'd become very popular with the local factory workers, who formed the bulk of his patients' base. Now, a petition urging clemency for Ruxton collected over 10,000 signatures. However, 3 judges at the Court of Criminal Appeal dismissed Ruxton's appeal on the 27th of April 1936, and he was hanged at Strangeways Prison, Manchester, on the morning of the 12th of May 1936. Now, I haven't been able to find accurate records of actually who hanged him. Some say it was Tom Pierrepoint, and others were saying it was his brother Albert Pierrepoint, the more famous of the two hangmen. So some journals say that it was Tom, and others say that it was Albert. So the jury is still out on that one. And Ruxton was buried in Strangeways Prison. However, when the prison wanted to extend the buildings, the governor of the prison purchased 2 more plots of land in Blackley Cemetery, Manchester. And records show that caskets of cremated remains were placed there in 1991. And a second entry shows that 51 caskets of cremated remains, including those of Ruxton's, were placed in the plot in 1993. This is a group of women, some of his patients, that staged a vigil outside the court. So, some of the fashions there, I don't think Marks and Sparks sell those nowadays, do they? This is a scene of angry crowds outside the court at Manchester. As I mentioned before, there was a lot of ill feeling against him, and people actually came there to protest. Now, I mentioned partway through the presentation that there was a bath involved where we dismembered the bodies. Well, that bath is still in use today. It's not in my house, I guarantee you that. So. But there it is. It's actually the Lancashire Constabulary Police Headquarters in Hutton near Preston, and it's used for the mounted division for the horses to drink from. We actually, on the way back from Moffat, Stephen and myself called in here. We were doing some more inquiries. We got in touch with the inspector in charge of the mounted division, and he said, yeah, we still got the bath, we still use it. Yeah, it's still there. We've got an unmarked grave here, and that's the resting place of Mary. It is unmarked. Murder most horrid, the end. But not quite the end, ladies and gentlemen, not quite the end. There's still, who used to say Jimmy Cricket, and there's more, come here, there's more. Not quite the end. And this is Ruxton's confession. In a letter dated the 14th of October 1935, opened after his death, he confessed the crimes. Following Ruxton's execution, the Sunday newspaper published this confession to the murders, recorded initially the day after his arrest. The newspaper was reported to have paid £3,000 for this, worth around £167,000 in today's money for the confession, from which parts of the costs his defence were paid for. This kind of deal between newspapers and people who had been accused of sensational crimes was fairly common at the time. And the name of the newspaper, if it's been going through your mind, the News of the World. Yeah, the News of the World. Yeah. And by the way, at the beginning of the presentation and during it, I forgot to tell you Mary's surname. Yeah, Mary Jane Rogerson. And she was my 7th cousin. Yeah. So we remember Mary each year. We're coming up to the anniversary actually next week. So quite sad. But the family never really talked about it. So. And there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I've done it within the time. Richard did give me about 3 hours to complete the presentation, but I've done it in about 40 minutes, which is a bit unusual for myself. So I don't profess to be an expert on anything, because when you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, they say that X is an unknown quantity and pert is a drip under pressure. So if you have any questions, you know, I'd like to try and answer them if I can. Yes, sir.
Do you know what happens to the children?
Yeah, they was taken into care. The last I heard, about 6 years ago, they're still alive, but living under assumed names down in London. They were moved away from Lancashire, and they actually moved down to London. Yeah, there's a codicil placed on them. Yeah, but yeah, as far as I'm aware, about 6 years ago, they were still alive. Or there again, you know, they could be sort of born in the 30s now. You know, they would be in the 90s now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, they were like that.
Yeah, it was a sad case. So. Okay, anybody else? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you'd all like to thank Bill for tonight's presentation. I should be watching the local press and the local newspapers with a lot of interest over the next couple of weeks, so please don't go away with any ideas. Although you've probably been given a lot this evening. But fascinating, and you know, I mean, I knew the story anyway, and if you are interested, and you're probably not, but that programme was featured recently on the television, and it was also featured in the press on one occasion as well. So, but I'm grateful for Bill coming over tonight.
Thank you.
He's come all the way from Valley in Anglesey. So that's one of the reasons he wanted to get through it quickly so that he could get back. Because I'm told they close the border at 9 o'clock.
They do actually.
I hope you get back home safely, and I hope they let you back over the border.
Thank you. So, talking of that, the A55, as we know, is notorious for roadworks and what have you. And I came down this afternoon, and there was thousands of yellow signs there. Road going to be closed from 7 o'clock. You go on all sorts of diversions.
I hope you have a fun trip home.
Yes. Because I forget where we've been now. Just a few weeks ago, we got diverted all around. Oh, we're coming back from Nottinghamshire. We came on the 494, you know, through Queensferry. And it was diverting us all around Queensferry, back onto the A55. Oh dear. It was like going back to Nottingham again, towards North Wales. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.